All right, so hello everybody. I am Dana Childs and I offer painting classes, specifically watercolor, in and around the Lake Tahoe region. And we do a lot of plein air outings, art hikes, that sort of thing. If you can see my website there, www.dloren.net. Anyhow, I've been promising myself that I would be doing this type of thing for a while. This kind of gives you an idea of my style and how I portray landscapes, florals, things like that. I'm definitely starting to get into abstracts. Hopefully that's not too shiny, but it gives you kind of an idea of my style. This is kind of my iconic baby right there. Anyhow, I have had several artists over the years that I've really admired. I trained under Gil Dellinger in college, and then Beverly Fields was the one who taught me more of an impressionistic style of watercolor. I took my very first watercolor lesson as an adult, gosh, maybe 31 years ago. Then I studied under her. Gil Dellinger taught me drawing and whatnot. And then I've learned from Gregory Kondos, but most recently, last week, I learned from Eric Weigart, who's one of my art heroes, and I'm looking forward to a workshop with Barbara Nitschy's coming up. But today what we're going to do is, these are some rough draft paintings that I'm not happy with. I love what's going on here, what I would enhance and shadow there, but rather than working this to death, I'm going to try to redo it. I want to move my land masses up. This is Emerald Bay. I should have a tea house here, but I just am not feeling it, so I probably won't do that. But this is a rough draft painting. This is a rough draft painting that Eric Weigart came in and painted over. I had too much light over here and he brought in some darks, but I think what happened is I just had too many darks to start off with, and when you're painting Lake Tahoe water, that can really become problematic. So I'm going to try to marry sort of my style, which is real loosey-goosey and runny, a lot of back runs, with sort of Eric's style, which is more this. He came in and I love what he did to my rocks in the foreground. But in order to do that, you know, and add some darks in here, but in order to do that, I'm going to have to save white somewhere. So what I'm going to do today is get vulnerable and just sort of think through as I'm painting, and then, you know, hopefully that will help you guys. I'm gonna make the sky less of a thing, even though this is the Nevada sky that we're looking at, because we're looking from Emerald Bay across to Nevada. The horizon line should be perfectly straight, just like that. Right? So don't forget, just do as I say, not as I do. Anyhow, that's the one straight line you ever have to draw in art, is a horizon line. I want these to look sort of hill-esque versus mountain-esque, but I also want them to be different at different planes. So the top of this is going to be, I can't do a dot to dot. Like, I'll probably make that even higher. Even though that mountain range, I do know the mountains over here are higher just because I've been there so often, you know. And then the foreground landmass, there is one that pops out here. We're not going to include that necessarily, but I do need to include the Emerald Bay land masses. And it's interesting because as the horizon is straight, as the lines get closer to you in Emerald Bay, we all know that it just kind of does this oval shape. And so I can either flatten it out a little, which would be my tendency, or I could work with it. I think I'm just going to leave it obscure right there and maybe decide as I'm painting. Okay, and then here's a smallish landmass that comes out, and then another one that buttresses up in front of it. And we're going to have it kind of start to curve, and then we've got a tree line interrupting it over here just a little, and we've got boulders in the foreground, which I love. I just want to be careful to not allow them to steal the show, although boulders can certainly do that. And even though there weren't really, in my photo that I took up there really weren't a lot of trees over here, I feel like I want to soften that. And it's a bit of a weaving and a framing Ansel Adams thing that I like to do. And it's might be kitsch to some people, but I really like it. You can hear my Yorkie over there. She's into something, but I'm not going to bother her right now, little turkey butt. Okay, so there you heard it. That's my cussing. I wanted to minimalize this body of water, but I keep seeming to allow for it to be too large. Before it was almost halved, which you just don't do. So Emerald Bay is prominent now, and this is more set back, which is what I wanted. I think I'm going to try to make my focal point in here. So I'm just going to have to be careful to save some whites in here specifically. My arsenal typically is, I love Winsor Newton Finest when I can afford it. So raw sienna, burnt sienna, and that handles those warms. New Gamboge, which is a must, and I don't care for the Winsor Newton version anymore. Sorry, Steve, but it's because it looks more like raw sienna than it should. I need a bright orangish or caddish type yellow. Ultramarine blue, which is sort of your neutral granulating blue. It's a catch-all for blue, period. It's just a real nice true blue. Antwerp blue is dynamic, and it's got a lot of warmth to it. You can also try to make it by adding a little yellow to the ultramarine blue. Permanent Rose, although it's a different blue altogether. Permanent Rose is nice for my red shades. And so this is pretty much my main palette, and it's something that Beverly Fields used that I've really stuck with over all these years. So, okay, and paint's already on the hands. That's a good sign. All right, so one of the ways that we were taught to mix colors, this last week I went to that workshop with Eric, is to scoop on the palette. And normally I'd have my palette this way, but I gave fresh squeezes of color, and so I'm going to start with the water because that's really my main feature. And anyone who knows me knows I love to paint water with large chunks of paint. And I'm going to add a little bit more ultramarine blue to that as well. But I've got mostly Antwerp in here. And a little bit of yellow to make that, New Gamboge to make that emerald color. And I'm going to go ahead and I like to start on a paper that's a little more wet than not. Just my thing. And the closer you get to the foreground, the more warm you want. So the thing that Eric was really impressing on us was to have the washes. Nice, soft, initial washes. And so I'm trying to keep that in mind as I'm working. And the greens of the trees, we're just going to let all that bleed together. One of the things that he really focused on that I loved was that you're bleeding edges together. And that just to me is a winning sign of someone who's really confident in applying their watercolor paint. And this is very thick, I know. And then I'm going to come in. Now normally he would have added all that water to the initial layer of the paint, but I just want some areas that are a little more bold, and so that's why I put that down initially. But I've got to save white in here. It's going to be hard. And so everything is value. Value, you've got, and it's interesting because having a drawing background, we always use value 0 to 10. I would teach my students 1 to 11, just because I felt that it had, it made more sense, you know, or I'm sorry, 0 to 10, 1 to 11 is the traditional value. So 0 meaning the white of the paper, and 10 being the darkest dark. And so, that's one of the things that Weigart really focused on this last week is values, but he broke his down to 1 to 5, which in some ways makes it even easier. Not worried about that drip right now. I want some green in my rocks. I'm okay with that. I just don't want too much green in my rocks. So these are going to be the trees in here, and I'll come in a minute and start to lay that in. That's where the island ends right there. So let that tree overlap. Just kind of cut through that shape. One of the things I found that Weigart did that just really makes me nervous is all the hard edges. He just is a whiz at setting in hard edges, and I'm always trying so hard to get rid of them, you know. A lot of artists do just the opposite. They're like, they don't want the blooms, they don't want the backgrounds, and they try so hard to avoid that. And I'm very much like, give me a bloom, give me a background. I want that. Okay, so dynamic color in here. And we know that the lake does this. This is just one of the things we love about our lake, is she just, you know, is so beautiful. And one thing that made me sad, I'll have to say, he walked up and he's like, where is this? And I had the tea house in and everything. He says, so where is this? I was like, I'm so sad. He's never been there. So hopefully, I think that Linda from our group, the gal who helped, the brave woman who during all this coronavirus scare helped us all still get together and work together. A very small group of women who were very vigilant about using hand sanitizers. You can tell from my poor war-torn hands this week. We all did lots and lots of sanitizer constantly. And it was up at Temple Sinai. That was a wonderful place to host it in Reno. I had such a good time. I learned so much. You know, and the not saving all the whites, that's hard too, because I just love to have more white in my painting. So I just had to get used to that. So I'm playing with combining kind of Dana style with some of the things I learned. Landscape theory, I've got one of his DVDs, so I'll be sharing more with you guys about the landscape theory that's prevalent with, I guess one of his contemporaries that went to school with him was Tom Lynch as well. So once I get some of that understanding better, I can share with you guys. So much fun. Okay, so now these trees are going to be, even though we know that the evergreens are dark green, I don't want competition.